It's time to change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. So grab your Bible and let's get started.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh, oh.
So now the first thing that Absalom does, now that he's a free man and restored to move around the city, he buys chariots and horses. And it's not because he's a warrior, because he's not. He's a son of privilege. He was raised a son of a king. He's never had a real job. The only thing that Absalom was any good at was rebellion. But Absalom, he's trying to build an image of himself to look like a king, riding in a chariot, but not for war, and it's not for speed, and it's not even for transportation. Because Absalom, he's having 50 men running in front of his chariot, which slows him down. But it's because when Absalom shows up, he wants to show up with this entourage, like he's pulling up in a limo for the press. But this is all for show. This is all public relations. So everywhere he goes, Absalom, he is showing up in style as a conquering king. But he's never fought one battle. He's never held one real job. He's always been given too much time on his hands. So he's not much like his father David at all. Where David, he was a warrior. He was a judge and a leader and a prophet who was also an accomplished musician in his spare time, writing amazing songs and poetry. And David, he didn't travel around town in a chariot or with an entourage. He walked on his feet like a man. So Absalom, he was all about the image, but he had no substance. He was just a politician. But Absalom is hard to resist because he's handsome and he's charming. It's just that he had no character. But that's not important to most people. He just told the people what they wanted to hear because that's how he advanced his own interests, by pretending to care for the interests of others. He's a politician. He's a liar, but he's very patient and he's very good at knowing when it's the right time to act. Where it took him 2 years of waiting to murder Amnon, and now he knows that he's going to have to wait before he can seize the throne of his father, David, and have him killed. And so Absalom's plan, now that he has his freedom, is to get up early and to get down to City Hall, to where the court trials are being heard, which is at the city gates. And there he is. He's standing at the place where someone would come to appeal to the king for justice. Because kings at this time, they were not only the head of the government, but they were also the supreme court, the highest court in the land, where if someone didn't feel like they received justice at a lower court, they could always appeal to the king's court. And so Absalom, he goes around spreading discontentment in the way that the king is handling the people's complaints, where he implies that he would do a better job. And to be fair to Absalom here, Absalom should have been discontent with the handling of justice, at least in the way how David handled the rape of his daughter Tamar, Absalom's sister. But here, Absalom, he's looking for discontented people standing at the king's post where the people would appeal to the king. And he's looking as if he's a king or a judge or somebody important, and he's dressed up in his royal robes. And he's saying that he wished he could help them because what you're wanting is right, but it's all gross flattery. He didn't mean a word of it, but he'd say like, so by the way, where are you from? Oh, how I wish I was king. I would help you because there's no one here who who will really give you justice, but I would. And he's quick to make friends from all over the kingdom, but he's not sincere. He's just politicking. And because he's the crown prince, people are supposed to bow to him because he's royalty, but he won't let them bow. So before they bow, he grabs her hand and he kisses them. We're all in this together. I'm just like you. We're the same. I'm the people's man. But Absalom, he wasn't a man of the people, and he knew that. He knew that he was better looking and that he had privileges that others didn't, where the laws that applied to others, they didn't apply to him, where he even got away with murder. And he drives around town in chariots, so he's not the people's man. But he's kissing babies and finding fault with the current administration, and he's letting it be known that he's a good alternative to his father's administration, that his father's old and he doesn't care, he's obsolete. And he says all this without coming out directly and saying it. And he's winning the people to himself, and he's alienating them from his father's administration. And it's easy to do this if you're a king's son, if you don't have a job and you have too much time on your hands with nothing to do. And it doesn't tell us this here, but if you read the exile psalms, which are written by David about this time period, you would read that David was probably sick in bed during this whole period, where he may not have been able to run the affairs of the country, and he may not have even been able to be available to go down to the city gates to hear court cases. Where in the psalm, it says that some were saying that they didn't think David would ever be able to get out of his sick bed, and that God had deserted David, and that he would die there. So this is a pure power grab. It's all politics, because politics were the same back then as they are today. It's all lies, but it works. And it says, so Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And that's about right. He stole them. He didn't earn their hearts like his father David did. Because David, he risked his life all the time for his people, and he was willing to die for them. He earned their respect, and he gave them this good life and security that they never had before this time. But many of the people now, they believe Absalom understands their problems better than David does. But the truth is, David was a hero, where Absalom, he's just a celebrity, and he's stealing their hearts without earning their respect. And then we get down to verse 7, and it says, it came to pass over 40 years, where the Hebrew here is a little bit confusing because it either means that Absalom is 40 years old here, or else there's a mistake and it means that it's 4 years. And that's what it says in the Arabic and the Syriac translations of this text. And Josephus, he also said that it should have been 4 years. And that's meaning that it took 4 years for Absalom to draw big numbers of devoted followers. And so now Absalom, he comes to his father, the king, and he's trying to cover up his treason. And Absalom is doing it in the guise of religion, in fulfilling this vow he made to God. And what father who is a real believer in God wouldn't want to hear his son say that he's going to go serve the Lord? And it doesn't say what kind of vow Absalom needed to fulfill in Hebron, but David loves seeing his son taking an interest in the things of God, where it kind of looks like Absalom, he's finally getting back on the right track. So, of course, David would encourage Absalom to fulfill his vow to the Lord because David believes he's being sincere. So David says, go in peace. And so I imagine that David, he's saying this with a smile and with a hug and a kiss. And these will be the last words David will ever say to Absalom. And these are the last words that Absalom will ever hear from his father. Because after this, Absalom, he leaves to go to Hebron to betray his father. in which this kind of reminds us of Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus with a kiss. And you may wonder, well, why would Absalom begin his insurrection in Hebron? Why would he start his conspiracy there? Well, one reason is that Absalom was raised in Hebron, so he knows people there. And the people of Hebron, they might have had some resentment toward David because David, he moved the capital from Hebron 19 miles away to Jerusalem. And by doing this in Hebron, because this is the same place where David was crowned king, that Absalom is hoping that the people of Israel will see this as a succession to the throne and not as treason. That this is just the right time for the crown prince to take the throne to replace that old sick king. And so Absalom, he gets down there and he has his messengers who are called spies here, and he has them all scattered throughout Israel, so that when the trumpet blows, all his messengers will announce throughout all of Israel, all at the same time, that Absalom is king in Hebron. But Absalom, he knows that he's going to need others to endorse his legitimacy to be the king. So Absalom, he invites 200 men from his father David's administration to go to Hebron with him. But they have no idea that they're going there to witness Absalom being crowned as a king. But being there, they don't know what to do. So they remain silent. And silence, it always gives the impression of acceptance. And so they are appearing as if they're for Absalom, which gives weight to Absalom's conspiracy. And it also means that there are 200 men from David's administration who are not in Jerusalem to be able to come to David's aid. And then Absalom, he calls for Ahithophel from Gilo, where Ahithophel lives. And Ahithophel, he is really the feather in Absalom's cap, because Ahithophel, he gives Absalom's government credibility and prestige, because Ahithophel, he was not only David's close friend and counselor, but he was David's top advisor. So he's kind of like the Henry Kissinger of their day, where he understands things. He understands countries and politics, everything. And talking to Ahithophel is like getting counsel, like talking to God himself. And that's because God had gifted him that way. And so he's known to be one of the highest, most respected, godliest men in Israel, or at least he used to be. And that's why he loved David. And that's why David loved him. Because these two, they were both sold out to God. So they're having fellowship for years, going to the tabernacle together, worshiping together. And this is the way it was until about 10 years ago. Until it was found out that David had seduced Bathsheba and murdered Uriah the Hittite. Because Ahithophel, he was the father of Eliam, who was one of David's 30 mighty men. And Eliam, he was the father of Bathsheba, who had given his daughter in marriage to another one of David's 30 mighty men, Uriah the Hittite. So that makes Ahithophel Bathsheba's grandfather. And so when David seduced Bathsheba, he knew that Bathsheba was his granddaughter. And David, he also knew that Eliam was her father, and he also knew that Uriah was her husband. But none of those things mattered to David at the time. And though God forgave him, there was no way that Ahithophel was ever going to forgive David for what he did to his family. But Ahithophel, he still pretended to still love David, but he didn't. But he stayed in his position, and he continued to act as David's counselor as if everything was okay. And David couldn't see it. He couldn't see that Ahithophel hated him, where he's smiling in David's face, but wanting vengeance in his heart. And tell me, what grandfather wouldn't feel the same way? So it's really easy to understand Ahithophel. So what began as unforgiveness became bitterness, which only grew in time, where he could only wait for the day to pay David back for what he did to his family. And so Ahithophel, he's playing the long game. He's waiting it out for years until the right time. So he's kind of like Absalom, but they're not the same. They don't hold the same things against David. And it's not really because Ahithophel is a big supporter of Absalom. He doesn't really think that Absalom would be a better king than David. They are just joined in their hatred for the same man. They're only joined because they have the same common enemy. They have different reasons and they have different goals. Where Absalom, he's wanting to take his father's throne, but Ahithophel, he just wants to kill David. And when David finds out that Ahithophel is with Absalom in the conspiracy, David, he's greatly hurt. And it was a surprise to him. It never crossed his mind. He thought Ahithophel loved him. And David, he writes about this in Psalm 41:9, where he says, "Even my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me." Where the same thing that David wrote about Ahithophel has been given to us as a prophecy regarding the betrayal of Jesus by Judas Iscariot. And then in Psalm 55:12, David wrote about Ahithophel. He said, "For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it, nor is it one who hates me, who has exalted himself against me, then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man my equal, my companion, my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God in the throng." And many of us, we have been betrayed, especially if you're older, because it seems that the older you get, it seems like the people that used to love you have changed and they don't necessarily love you anymore. Because to be betrayed, it has to be by someone you love, someone that's supposed to love you. Like in a marriage, people are often betrayed in a marriage, or by children, or by parents, or by very close friends. You're always betrayed by somebody you love. Your enemies, they can't betray you. They're just acting the way they are. They act the way that enemies act. It's only the people you love that can betray you. And if you asked these men, if you asked Absalom or you asked Ahithophel, they would tell you, well, David betrayed me first. But David, he never betrayed them. His love for them had never changed. He's never hated them. He's only loved them. And when I read these chapters, and I almost wasn't going to say it, but what keeps coming to my mind is this is the way a church splits, where that person who ends up splitting a church is usually someone who's loved by the pastor, that it's usually the pastor who has put him in that position that they're in. So he's a trusted friend. And then they end up spreading discontentment among the church members, saying things like, well, if I was the pastor, I would do things different. Things would be much better around here, until they have a following and they've gathered enough support from the church body to make the split. And then they either try to take over the church or they try to take as many members as they can to form a new church and take the support away from the current church. I kind of only wish we had enough people in our church to be able to even to think about a split, but we're not quite there yet. And every time I've ever seen this, it was always by somebody who was greatly loved. And it's always been this deep betrayal where the pastor is very grieved over the person who split the church. He's more grieved over the person than the actual split itself. Where these people, they would risk destroying the whole body of Christ, the whole church, to promote themselves to be the new leader. Where there's never anything of God in it. But they will never say that. They'll always say things like, well, God was leading me. All right, so now these guys are down in Hebron. In Absalom, he's offering sacrifices. So he's trying to keep up with the religious pretense to appear like God is in his movement. And we're told that Absalom's group is growing and it's gaining momentum and it's increasing in number. Where in verse 13, a message finally gets to Jerusalem, and David, he hears about this rebellion for the first time. And he hears, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. And you see here how David, he isn't shocked, and he believes it. He doesn't question that Absalom is capable of doing this act. He knows that Absalom is ruthless. And so David, he doesn't wait. He knows that Absalom will be heading straight for Jerusalem. And if Absalom gets there before they can flee, they'll all be trapped, because it would be easy for Absalom to surround Jerusalem with all the armies from the northern tribes, leaving them no way of escape. And that would make Jerusalem the battleground. And David wants to protect the people of Jerusalem from this senseless loss of life that will come with war. And so David, he saves Jerusalem by leaving. And then all the king's servants, they all swear their loyalty to David, saying, "We are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands," which is the one good thing that comes out of this trial, where David, he not only finds out who his enemies are, but he also finds out who his friends are. Because as a reigning king, everybody acts like they're your friend. But it's only when you get kicked off your throne, that's when you find out who's loyal to you, where you find who's willing to go with you when you have nowhere to go. Because nobody here is forced to go with David. And so David, he just leaves 10 women concubines behind to be able to keep things running. And David here, he has no reason to believe that these women would be in any danger and that they would be safe in the palace. And then we start reading from verse 15 down, and everything you read regarding David says, the king, the king, the king, the king. The king did this, the king did this, the king, the king. Because the writer wants us to understand that David is still the king. It's not Absalom. And then David and the people with him, they all move out of the city in the opposite direction of Hebron. And they rested at the very last house, leaving the suburbs of Jerusalem. And then we're told all the people who were with David, who went before him. And it lists the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And then it says all the Gittites, the 600 men who had been following David since his time of Gath. And what's really interesting here is that all of these men are foreigners. They're all Gentiles that have been loyal to David for a very long time, even way before he was king. And what we don't read here is we do not read of David's own countrymen, his own fellow Israelites, or even those from his own tribe of Judah, of any of them going with them. And for that much, we don't even read about David's own family going with him. But here David, who is now over 60 years old, he's once again fleeing for his life. Something he hasn't had to do for a long time since the days of Saul. And again, David here, he's lost everything he has, everything that he's built up until now. And he's leaving with only the clothes on his back. And this time, he doesn't have the strength of a young man. But the one thing he does have is he has friends.
To let it go.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, why don't you join us for church this Sunday? Our service time is 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel, Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,